Hi, today I'm going to tell you a story that happened to me in Washington, D.C., when I was fishing. Day 0, the preparation. The sun was just beginning to dip below the horizon as I hauled my fishing gear into the back of my truck. 7 days. 7 full days on the isolated shores of Blackwater Lake, a place whispered about in fishermen's circles but rarely visited. Blackwater Lake wasn't just any fishing spot. Hidden deep within the forest, it was known for its eerie stillness and tales of monster catches, fish that seemed more legend than reality. I'd heard it all from a fellow angler at the bar last month. He'd spoken with a haunted look in his eyes, warning me about the lake as much as he was tempting me with its bounty. "It's not just the fish that'll keep you up," he'd said, staring into his drink. "That lake holds things." I dismissed his cryptic warning. After all, fishing was my escape, my solitude. No cell phones, no distractions, just me, my rod, and the open water. My preparation was meticulous. I packed enough food for the week, my most reliable rods and reels, and a thick journal to document every catch. I included a tent and lanterns, but no guns. Why would I need one? It wasn't like bears hung around Blackwater, or so I'd been told. As I tightened the straps on my gear, I took one last look at my house, bathed in the warm orange light of dusk. It would be a peaceful week. Just me and the lake. Tomorrow would mark the beginning of what I imagined as a serene adventure. Little did I know, my expectations couldn't have been more wrong. Day 1, arrival. The drive to Blackwater Lake was uneventful at first. The winding roads carried me deeper into the forest, where the sunlight barely filtered through the dense canopy. I'd never been this far out before, and the isolation was intoxicating. By the time I reached the final stretch, a narrow dirt path barely wide enough for my truck, I could feel the pull of the lake. The air grew cooler as I approached. The trees seemed taller here, their branches stretching like claws over the path. Finally, the road ended, opening to a small clearing where the lake revealed itself. Blackwater Lake was massive, its surface so still it looked like a sheet of glass. The name wasn't an exaggeration, the water was dark, so dark that it reflected the surrounding trees like a mirror. I parked the truck and unloaded my gear. My campsite was a small, rocky shoreline near the water's edge. It was perfect, close enough to the lake for easy fishing but with enough tree cover to shield me from the wind. The first thing I noticed was the silence. No birds, no rustling leaves, just an oppressive, eerie stillness. It wasn't unpleasant, but it was noticeable. I spent the rest of the afternoon setting up camp. By the time the sun began to set, I had my tent pitched, my fishing rods ready, and a small fire crackling. The twilight made the lake shimmer, its inky blackness reflecting the orange and purple hues of the sky. I cast my line for the first time, letting the hook sink into the mysterious depths. The first tug came almost immediately. It was strong, stronger than I'd expected. The rod bent under the pressure, and my pulse quickened. Whatever was on the other end was huge. I grinned, feeling the thrill of the fight as I reeled it in. But just as suddenly as it had struck, the line went slack. I pulled the line in and inspected the hook. It was clean, as if nothing had ever been there. Strange, but not unheard of. Fish can be cunning, I told myself, and cast again. Night fell quickly, and with it came a dense fog that rolled off the lake like smoke. My fire struggled against the moisture, and I decided to turn in early. As I zipped up my tent, I noticed something odd. The fog wasn't drifting randomly, it seemed to be moving in deliberate patterns, swirling slowly in a circular motion over the water. I chalked it up to fatigue and lay down, the sound of my heartbeat loud in the silence. But the silence didn't last. At first, it was faint, barely audible over the whisper of the wind. A soft, rhythmic splashing, like someone paddling in the water. It didn't make sense, there wasn't another soul for miles. I sat up, straining to hear. The splashing grew louder, closer. My breath caught as I realized it wasn't the sound of paddles. It was something moving, swimming, through the water. Grabbing my flashlight, I unzipped the tent and shone the beam toward the lake. The light cut through the fog, illuminating the surface. Nothing. The water was still, as smooth as glass. My skin prickled as I scanned the shoreline, but there was no sign of movement. The sound had stopped. Shaking my head, I laughed nervously and returned to the tent. Just the lake playing tricks on me, I thought. Tomorrow, I'd laugh about it while reeling in a monster catch. But as I lay down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something, somewhere, was watching. Day 2, the uneasy catch. The morning sun filtered weakly through the trees as I crawled out of my tent, yawning like I'd barely slept a wink, which I hadn't. The splashing sounds from the lake had replayed in my mind all night, leaving me feeling wired and jittery. But hey, I was here to fish, not spook myself out like some B-movie protagonist. "All right, you sly old lake," I muttered, stretching my arms to shake off the unease. "Let's see what you've got." With my coffee steaming in an old tin mug, I made my way to the shoreline. The lake looked different in the daylight, less sinister but just as mysterious. The fog had lifted, and the surface gleamed under the sun. I cast my line again, determined to hook whatever gave me that monster tug last night. It didn't take long. As soon as the bait hit the water, bam! The rod nearly jerked out of my hands. "Holy smokes!" I yelled, gripping the rod like my life depended on it. The fish, or whatever was on the line, was putting up one hell of a fight. It was like trying to haul a freight train out of quicksand. I planted my feet and leaned back, sweat trickling down my neck despite the cool air. After what felt like forever, I managed to reel it in. But as soon as I saw what dangled at the end of the line, my stomach did a flip. It wasn't a fish. Not even close. Instead, a bundle of reeds and something else, something slimy, hung from the hook. I squinted, trying to make sense of it. The slimy stuff looked like scales, but they were iridescent, shimmering in a way that made my eyes ache. Tangled in the reeds was a piece of rotted rope, frayed and covered in the same weird slime. "What the hell is this?" I muttered, nudging the mess with my boot. The slime had an awful stink, like brackish water mixed with dead fish and a touch of rotten eggs. My appetite for lunch completely shot. Shrugging it off, I tossed the mess aside and cast again. Fishing is about patience, right? You gotta wade through the junk to find the prize. But the weirdness didn't stop. Every time I cast my line, I reeled in something strange, more reeds, chunks of wood that looked burned, and once, a half-decayed fish head that looked like it belonged to something way too big for this lake. It was enough to make me second-guess my choice of vacation spot, but I wasn't about to pack up just yet. Not after driving all this way. As the afternoon dragged on, the unease settled in my gut like a bad burrito. The silence of the lake, which I'd found peaceful yesterday, now felt suffocating. There was no breeze, no birds, not even the buzz of insects. Just me, the lake, and that godforsaken stench of slime that wouldn't leave my nostrils. Around mid-afternoon, I decided to switch spots, hoping for better luck. I paddled my small inflatable boat out to the center of the lake. The water was even darker here, almost black. As I cast my line, I noticed something out of the corner of my eye, a ripple, far too big to be a fish, breaking the surface about 50 feet away. I froze. My eyes locked on the ripple as it disappeared. The lake went still again, as if nothing had happened. "You're trippin', man," I muttered under my breath, shaking my head. "Too much caffeine, not enough sleep. Chill out." But deep down, I knew something was off. Big time. I fished for another hour, but my heart wasn't in it anymore. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see. I don't even know what. By the time I rowed back to shore, the sun was dipping low, casting long, eerie shadows across the clearing. As I unloaded my gear, a sound made me stop cold. It was faint but unmistakable, a low, guttural groan, like the lake itself was waking up. "Yeah, no," I said, laughing nervously. "I'm outta here for today." I bolted back to my tent, zipping it shut like that thin fabric could protect me from whatever was out there. As darkness fell, I sat inside with my lantern, clutching my journal and scribbling down every strange detail. Maybe I was just freaking myself out. Or maybe Blackwater Lake had secrets I didn't want to uncover. As the groan echoed faintly through the night, one thought kept circling in my mind: what the hell had I gotten myself into? Day 3, Shadows Beneath. Morning came with the kind of heaviness that made getting up feel like a chore. My muscles ached from gripping the rod so hard yesterday, and my brain was clouded from another restless night. The groaning sound from the lake had stopped at some point, but not before it crept into my bones, making me shiver under my sleeping bag. I stumbled out of the tent, blinking against the pale, gray light. the lake wasn't shimmering anymore. Its surface was dull and lifeless, like it had been drained of all color. The air carried a faint metallic tang, sharp enough to make me gag. Something was wrong. Something was very, very wrong. "Come on, man. Pull it together," I muttered, slapping my cheeks. "You're here to fish, not to jump at shadows." I grabbed my rod and decided to stay near the shore this time. The thought of rowing back to the center of the lake made my stomach churn. As I cast my line, the silence pressed down on me like a lead blanket. The usual peace I sought while fishing had twisted into something oppressive, like the lake was watching me. The first catch came quickly, but when I reeled it in, my heart dropped. It wasn't a fish. It was a boot. An old, muddy boot, waterlogged and covered in that same iridescent slime I'd seen yesterday. Inside the boot was something worse, a small, skeletal foot still attached at the ankle, its bones yellowed and brittle. "Jesus Christ!" I yelled, throwing the rod down like it had burned me. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over my own feet. My breaths came fast, shallow, like I couldn't get enough air. The boot dangled from the hook, swinging grotesquely in the breeze. The tiny bones knocked together with a soft clink, a sound that sent a shiver racing up my spine. My hands trembled as I used a stick to unhook the boot and chuck it into the woods. But even as it disappeared into the undergrowth, the image stayed burned in my mind. Whose foot was that? How did it end up here? And more importantly, what else was down there? The day dragged on, and so did the horrors. Every cast brought something worse, a rusted knife with dried blood caked on the blade, a child's doll missing an eye, a tangled mess of fishing line with a chunk of raw flesh still hooked to it. Each discovery made my stomach churn harder, my throat tighten with fear. By mid-afternoon, I'd had enough. I was done fishing. I packed up my gear and decided to hike around the lake instead, hoping the exercise would clear my head. But the deeper I went into the forest, the darker it seemed to get. The trees were gnarled and twisted, their branches clawing at the sky like skeletal fingers. The metallic stench followed me, growing stronger with each step. And then I found it, a small clearing on the far side of the lake. At first, it looked like nothing special, just a patch of dead grass surrounded by trees. But as I stepped closer, I saw the symbols. Carved into the dirt were strange, looping patterns, symbols I didn't recognize but felt wrong to look at, like they weren't meant for human eyes. They spiraled outward from the center of the clearing, where a mound of rocks stood like a crude altar. The rocks were slick with slime, and the ground beneath them was stained dark. I didn't want to get any closer, but my feet moved on their own. The air was heavier here, thick with an unexplainable dread. As I reached the altar, I saw something that made my blood run cold, a pair of eyes, glowing faintly red, staring at me from the shadows between the rocks. "Who's there?" I croaked, my voice barely audible over the pounding of my heart. The eyes didn't blink. They didn't move. But the air grew colder, and a low growl rumbled through the clearing, vibrating in my chest. I stumbled backward, tripping over the roots and landing hard on my back. The growl grew louder, joined by the unmistakable sound of footsteps, heavy, wet, and coming straight for me. I scrambled to my feet and bolted, tearing through the forest like a madman. Branches clawed at my face, roots threatened to trip me, but I didn't stop until I was back at my camp. The lake greeted me with its dead, gray stillness, but I felt no relief. My tent looked like a flimsy joke, incapable of keeping out whatever was in those woods. My hands shook as I lit a fire, my mind racing with what I'd seen. The symbols, the altar, the eyes, I couldn't explain any of it, and that terrified me. Night came too quickly, swallowing the lake in darkness. The groans started again, louder this time, accompanied by faint splashes. Something was out there, moving in the water. I sat by the fire, clutching a knife I'd pulled from my tackle box, every muscle in my body taut with fear. As the splashes grew closer, I thought I heard something else, a voice. Faint and guttural, calling my name. "Jack, come to the water." I froze, my blood turning to ice. How did it know my name? Day 4, the haunting depths. The voice stayed with me long after the fire had burned to embers. I'd sat frozen for what felt like hours, staring at the dark lake, my name echoing faintly in the back of my mind. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those red, glowing eyes in the clearing, or worse, heard the voice again. When dawn finally came, it brought no comfort. The lake looked lifeless under the pale, gray light, its surface as still as death. The metallic stench was stronger than ever, thick in the air and clinging to my skin. I felt trapped, like the lake was a predator, circling me slowly, waiting for the right moment to strike. I tried to distract myself with breakfast, but my appetite had disappeared. Every bite of granola felt like sand in my mouth. My hands trembled as I poured coffee, spilling it onto the rocks by the fire. I needed to get out of here. But the thought of driving back down that narrow road, with the forest pressing in on all sides, was just as terrifying as staying. Instead, I decided to fish again. A terrible idea, I know, but part of me thought that if I just acted normal, everything would go back to normal. So, I grabbed my rod and walked to the shoreline, the morning fog curling around my legs like ghostly fingers. The first cast hit the water with a soft plop, and for a while, nothing happened. The quiet was oppressive, but I welcomed it compared to the horrors of yesterday. I told myself I was overreacting, that my mind was playing tricks on me. The boot, the knife, the altar, they were just coincidences, oddities blown out of proportion by my frayed nerves. Then I felt the tug. It wasn't like before. This wasn't the playful nibble of a fish testing the bait or the powerful yank of something big on the line. It was deliberate. A slow, steady pull, as if whatever was down there was toying with me. My stomach twisted as I reeled in, the line heavy and resistant. When the catch broke the surface, I screamed. It wasn't a fish. It wasn't even debris. It was a hand, a severed, human hand, pale and bloated from its time in the water. The fingers curled slightly, as if trying to reach for something. Its wrist ended in a jagged stump, the flesh torn and frayed. And it was holding something, a chain, rusted and slimy, leading back into the water. I dropped the rod and stumbled back, bile rising in my throat. The hand sank slowly, the chain following it into the depths. My mind raced. Whose hand was that? Why was it holding a chain? And what was at the other end? I didn't stick around to find out. Grabbing my gear, I ran back to the camp, my heart pounding like a drum. Every step felt like a mistake, like I was being watched, pursued. By the time I reached the tent, I was drenched in sweat, gasping for air. I had to leave. Now. But as I threw my gear into the truck, something caught my eye. The water near the shore wasn't still anymore. Ripples spread outward, small at first but growing larger, as if something massive was moving beneath the surface. Then the groaning started again, deep and resonant, vibrating through the ground. It was louder now, closer. Forget this, I muttered, slamming the truck door. My hands fumbled with the keys, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The engine roared to life, and I floored the gas pedal, the tires kicking up dirt as I sped down the narrow path. The forest seemed darker than before, the trees leaning closer, their branches like skeletal hands. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something chasing me. But the only thing I saw was the lake, growing smaller and smaller in the distance. That should have been it. I should have been safe. But as I rounded a bend, the truck skidded to a halt. The road was blocked. A massive tree had fallen across it, its roots torn from the earth as if by some great force. I cursed, slamming my hands against the steering wheel. There was no way around it, no way to move the tree on my own. I was trapped. And then I heard it again. Jack, come back. The voice was louder now, more insistent. It wasn't coming from the lake anymore, it was coming from the forest, echoing between the trees. My blood turned to ice as the shadows seemed to shift, figures moving just out of sight. Come back, Jack. Join us. The groaning grew louder, vibrating in my chest like a second heartbeat. The metallic stench was overwhelming, making my head spin. I stumbled out of the truck, clutching my head as the world tilted around me. The last thing I saw before everything went black was the glowing red eyes, staring at me from the shadows. They weren't just watching, they were waiting. Day 5, the red eyes. I woke up on the cold, damp ground, my head throbbing like someone had taken a sledgehammer to it. For a moment, I couldn't remember where I was. The world around me was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that felt alive, as though the forest itself were holding its breath. Then it all came rushing back, the lake, the severed hand, the red eyes. My stomach churned as I scrambled to my feet. The truck was gone. What the hell? I whispered, spinning around. The dirt road stretched out in both directions, empty except for the fallen tree. The air smelled of rotten iron, so thick it burned my throat. I staggered toward the spot where my truck had been, my boots crunching against the gravel. There were no tire marks, no sign it had ever been there. It was like the forest had swallowed it whole. A rustling sound snapped me out of my daze. My heart leapt as I turned toward the noise. Something moved between the trees, a shadow too large to be any animal I knew. My breath hitched as I caught a glimpse of it, a long, twisted shape, hunched and sinewy, its limbs impossibly thin. And those eyes. Those terrible, glowing red eyes. They locked onto mine, and my legs turned to jelly. I stumbled back, tripping over a root and landing hard on my side. The thing tilted its head, almost curiously, before slinking back into the shadows. No, 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 I muttered, scrambling to my feet. I had to get away. But where? The path was blocked, the forest thick and unrelenting. The groaning started again, low and guttural, like the earth itself was moaning in pain. It was louder now, closer, vibrating through the air. I clutched my head, my thoughts scattering like leaves in the wind. Jack, the voice came again, warbling and inhuman. Why are you running? I bolted. I didn't care where I was going, I just needed to move, to put as much distance as possible between me and whatever was stalking me. The forest seemed to twist around me, the trees closing in, their branches clawing at my clothes and skin. The voice followed, growing louder and more distorted. Don't fight it, Jack. You belong here. The ground beneath me began to shift, soft and spongy, sucking at my boots. The groaning grew deafening, and the shadows between the trees seemed to crawl toward me, like living, writhing things. Then I saw it. The lake. I skidded to a halt, my breath catching in my throat. Somehow, I'd ended up back at Blackwater Lake, its dark surface rippling gently in the dim light. The fog was thicker now, swirling like smoke, and the metallic stench was almost unbearable. And standing at the shoreline was the figure. It was taller now, impossibly thin, its limbs elongated and angular. The red eyes glowed brighter, cutting through the fog like twin beacons. You can't leave, it said, its voice resonating inside my skull. You were called. Called. I croaked, my voice barely a whisper. The thing stepped closer, its movements unnatural, like a puppet on tangled strings. The lake has chosen you. I took a step back, my foot sinking into the soft earth. Chosen me for what? The creature didn't answer. Instead, it raised one impossibly long arm and pointed toward the water. As if on cue, the lake began to churn, its surface breaking apart in violent waves. Something was rising from the depths, something massive and ancient. No, I whispered, shaking my head. No, no, no. The water exploded outward, and for a moment, I couldn't comprehend what I was seeing. A monstrous shape emerged, its body covered in scales that shimmered with an otherworldly light. Its head was serpentine, its eyes glowing with the same red fire as the creature on the shore. Tentacles writhed around its body, each one tipped with jagged claws. The thing roared, a sound so loud and primal it shook the ground beneath me. I fell to my knees, clutching my ears as pain lanced through my skull. You belong to it now, the creature said, its voice a sinister hiss. The monstrous shape in the lake lunged toward the shore, its tentacles reaching for me. I scrambled backward, but the ground gave way beneath me, pulling me closer to the water. The metallic stench was overwhelming, filling my lungs, making me gag. Desperation took over. I grabbed a rock and hurled it at the creature, but it didn't even flinch. Its tentacles wrapped around my legs, pulling me closer. The water was freezing, biting into my skin like needles. No. I screamed, thrashing against its grip. I don't belong here. The last thing I saw before the water closed over me was the creature on the shore, its red eyes blazing with triumph. And then, darkness. Day 6, beneath the surface. I don't know how long I was submerged. Time felt warped, stretched out into infinity, the darkness swallowing every thought, every shred of reason. The freezing water clung to my skin, numbing my body and my mind. I should have drowned, yet somehow, I didn't. When my eyes opened, I wasn't in the lake anymore, or at least, not in the lake as I knew it. A dim, greenish light filtered through the water, illuminating a vast expanse that seemed impossibly large for Blackwater. The walls around me pulsed and shimmered, as if alive, and the water wasn't water anymore. It was thicker, viscous, almost like jelly, and it smelled of decay. Shapes moved in the distance, hulking, unnatural forms that shifted and writhed as though they were struggling to maintain their shapes. The faint glow of their eyes, red, like the ones I'd seen above, punctuated the darkness, growing brighter as they drew closer. I wanted to scream, to thrash, to run, but my body was frozen. Not from cold, but from something else, a force pressing down on me like a physical weight. My lungs burned with the effort of holding my breath, yet I wasn't gasping. Somehow, I was breathing in this otherworldly soup. Jack. The voice echoed again, but this time it was all around me, vibrating through the water and into my skull. You've been chosen for the gift. Gift? I managed to whisper, though the words felt foreign in my mouth. My voice didn't echo, it was absorbed, swallowed by the water like a secret. The shadows coalesced into a single form, massive and towering. It was the creature from the lake, but now its size was incomprehensible. Its tentacles unfurled slowly, almost lazily, like a predator with all the time in the world. Its face, or what passed for one, was both mesmerizing and horrifying, an amalgamation of shifting shapes that never settled. Its eyes, those blazing red orbs, stared into my soul. You are part of the cycle now, it said, its voice both a hiss and a roar. The lake sustains. The lake takes. And now, you will give. No, I whispered, though the words sounded hollow even to me. I didn't ask for this. You didn't need to, the creature replied. Its tentacles surrounded me, not touching, but close enough that I could feel their power. You came to the lake. You heard its call. That was enough. I shook my head, tears blending with the viscous liquid around me. I didn't know. I didn't know what this place was. The creature tilted its head, almost mockingly. Ignorance is not an excuse. The world shifted again, and I was no longer in the open expanse. I was in a cavern, the walls lined with strange, pulsing sacs that glowed faintly in the greenish light. Inside each one was a human form, their faces frozen in expressions of terror or agony. Some were clearly rotted, their bodies half consumed by the gelatinous fluid. Others looked fresh, their eyes darting wildly behind the translucent membrane. No, 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 I muttered, backing away. This isn't real. This can't be real. You will join them, the creature said, its voice soft now, almost gentle. You will nourish the lake. I tried to run, but the thick water made every movement slow and clumsy. Tentacles lashed out, wrapping around my arms and legs, pulling me back toward the sacs. My screams were muffled, swallowed by the liquid as the creature dragged me closer. And then, I saw it, a face in one of the sacs. Familiar. Hauntingly familiar. It was me. My own face stared back at me, eyes wide with fear, mouth frozen in a silent scream. The sight broke something inside me, shattering any semblance of control. I thrashed wildly, my breath coming in ragged, useless gasps. Accept your fate, the creature said, its voice resonating with finality. The lake is eternal. You are nothing but a ripple. No. I screamed, my voice breaking through the oppressive silence. With a surge of desperation, I reached out and grabbed a jagged piece of rock from the cavern floor. I swung it wildly at the nearest tentacle, slicing through the slimy flesh. The creature roared in pain, its grip loosening just enough for me to break free. I didn't think. I didn't plan. I just ran. The cavern twisted and turned, a maze of pulsating walls and glowing sacs. The creature's roars echoed behind me, growing louder with every step. My lungs burned, my legs screamed for rest, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. Finally, I saw it, a faint light ahead, brighter than the sickly green glow of the cavern. I pushed toward it, the water growing thinner, lighter, until I broke through the surface with a gasp. I was back in the lake, the cold night air stinging my face. The shoreline was just ahead, and I swam with every ounce of strength I had left. When I dragged myself onto the rocky beach, I collapsed, coughing up the vile liquid that had filled my lungs. The lake was silent again, its surface calm and undisturbed. But I knew it wasn't over. The creature was still down there, waiting, watching. And somehow, I knew it wouldn't let me go so easily. Day 7, the escape. I woke to the sound of silence. The kind of silence that feels loud, oppressive, like the world is holding its breath. My body ached from head to toe, my skin raw and burning where the creature's tentacles had gripped me. I was alive, but barely. The lake stretched before me, calm and mirror-like, reflecting the pale gray sky above. But I knew better now. Beneath that serene surface lay horrors I could never fully comprehend. I couldn't stay here another moment. My time at Blackwater Lake was over, if I even had any time left. I crawled toward the remains of my camp. Everything looked different, warped somehow, like it didn't belong to the same world I had entered 7 days ago. My tent sagged, the fabric torn and covered in the same iridescent slime I had seen so many times. My supplies were scattered, as if something, or someone, had rummaged through them. The worst part was the footprints. They weren't mine. They weren't human. Large, webbed impressions, lined with claw marks, crisscrossed the ground, leading from the water's edge to my tent and back again. My stomach twisted, but I couldn't let fear paralyze me. I grabbed what little gear remained, my backpack, a half-full water bottle, and a hunting knife, and set out. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to leave the lake behind. As I stumbled toward the dirt path, the forest seemed different. The trees loomed larger, their branches intertwining like a cage overhead. The metallic stench still lingered, stronger now, as if the air itself was tainted. But the worst part was the feeling. That suffocating sense of being watched, followed, hunted. Every step I took felt wrong, like I was being led somewhere rather than finding my own way. The groaning started again, faint and distant at first, but growing louder with each passing moment. I quickened my pace, my breath coming in shallow gasps. The path twisted and turned, but no matter how far I walked, the lake seemed to stay close, always just beyond the trees. Then the voice came. Jack, it was louder now, clearer, no longer a distant echo. You can't leave. I froze, gripping the knife tightly, my knuckles white. Stay back. I shouted, my voice shaking. I don't belong here. The laughter that followed was cold, hollow, and inhuman. You belong more than you know. The shadows shifted ahead of me, and the creature stepped into view. It was smaller now, more compact, but no less terrifying. Its eyes burned brighter than ever, and its body was slick with the lake's vile fluid. You think you've escaped? It hissed, tilting its head. There is no escape. You're part of the lake now. Forever. No, I said, backing away. I won't go back. I won't. The creature laughed again, the sound grating against my sanity. The lake doesn't let go. You'll return, willingly or not. It lunged at me, its movements unnaturally fast. I barely had time to react, raising the knife and slashing wildly. The blade bit into its flesh, and it recoiled with a guttural scream. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I ran. My legs burned, my lungs screamed for air, but I didn't stop. The path ahead was a blur, the forest a dark, shifting maze. And then, like a miracle, I saw it, the dirt road where my truck had been. The fallen tree was gone, the path clear. Relief surged through me as I sprinted forward, the weight of the lake finally lifting. But just as I reached the edge of the forest, the voice came again, louder, angrier. You'll never leave. The groaning turned into a roar, and the ground beneath me shook violently. I turned back, and my heart stopped. The creature was chasing me, its form twisting and expanding, its tentacles reaching out like the claws of death. With a final burst of adrenaline, I lunged forward, breaking through the trees and onto the road. My vision blurred as I ran, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. When I finally collapsed, the sun was rising, bathing the world in golden light. The groaning had faded, and the stench was gone. The forest was behind me now, distant and unreal, like a bad dream. But as I lay there, gasping for breath, I knew the truth. Blackwater Lake wasn't done with me. Not yet. It had let me go, but only for now. Somewhere deep in the forest, the lake was waiting, watching, its dark waters rippling with anticipation. And I knew, with a sick certainty, that it would call me back.